Hey everyone, and welcome back. Ever wondered what life was really like in the medieval ages, beyond the knights and castles? Today, we're diving into a topic that might surprise you, a hidden corner of society often overlooked, yet incredibly prevalent, the medieval brothel. Forget everything you think you know, because the truth is far more complex and fascinating than simple tales of sin. Ready for a journey back in time? Let's uncover some secrets. When we imagine the Middle Ages, our minds often conjure images of chivalry, piety, and strict moral codes. And while that was certainly a part of the era, the reality on the ground was often much grittier, much more human, and frankly, a lot more contradictory. Prostitution, for example, wasn't just a fringe activity. It was a widespread, often openly acknowledged, and sometimes even regulated part of urban life across medieval Europe. From bustling cities like Paris and London to smaller towns, these establishments existed, sometimes right in the heart of communities. But why, and how did society reconcile such a practice with its deeply religious values? Well, that's where things get really interesting. The public perception of brothels and the women who worked in them was a tangled web, oscillating wildly between what was seen as a necessary evil and outright disgrace. It reflected the profound contradictions of medieval society itself, where religious doctrine preached chastity and purity, yet practical realities often demanded different solutions. One of the prevailing arguments, often put forth by civic authorities and even some theologians, was that brothels served a vital purpose. They were a necessary evil. This idea, sometimes called the sewer theory, suggested that by containing immoral activities within specific areas, brothels could protect respectable women from harassment and preserve the sanctity of marriage. It was a pragmatic, if morally ambiguous, approach to managing what was seen as an inevitable aspect of human nature. Imagine a busy medieval town. Men, often single, away from home, were simply seeking companionship, formed a significant part of the population: soldiers, merchants, apprentices, students. For many, marriage was a distant prospect, or simply not an option. Brothels offered a space, however fraught, where these needs could ostensibly be met, often under the watchful, if sometimes indifferent, eye of the local authorities. These establishments weren't always hidden away in dark alleys. In some cities, particularly those with a more liberal or pragmatic approach, brothels were often centrally located. They might even be state-run or licensed, a way for city councils to generate revenue through taxes and fees. This regulation also allowed for some degree of control over sanitation and prices, although the effectiveness of such oversight varied greatly. Now, let's talk about the women themselves. What drove them to this life? It's crucial to remember that for many, it wasn't a choice made lightly, but a stark reality born of economic necessity. The medieval world was harsh, and opportunities for women, especially those without family, wealth, or protection, were incredibly limited. Poverty, famine, abandonment, widowhood, or being an orphan could easily push a woman into such a desperate situation. For some, it might have been the only way to survive, to put food on the table, or to avoid starvation. Life in a medieval brothel was undoubtedly challenging. These women faced social stigma, vulnerability, and often harsh working conditions. They were often at the bottom rung of society, with few rights and little protection. However, it's also important not to paint every experience with the same brush of absolute despair. There were variations in the types of brothels, from squalid, unregulated dens to more organized and even relatively prosperous establishments. Interestingly, many medieval regulations around brothels weren't necessarily about outright condemnation, but about control. They often dictated where brothels could be located, what hours they could operate, and who could visit them. Some even stipulated dress codes for prostitutes, often brightly colored garments or specific badges, which on one hand marked them out, but on the other, might have offered a strange form of official recognition. The narrative of sin was ever present, of course. The church consistently condemned prostitution as a grave sin, and penitential movements often targeted brothels and their patrons. Yet, the church's influence was often balanced by the practical realities faced by secular authorities. It created a constant tension, a moral tightrope walk for medieval society. Confessors might preach repentance, but city officials might simultaneously be collecting taxes from the very establishments they supposedly decried. What might surprise you is that this wasn't necessarily a permanent destiny for all women involved. The medieval period, despite its rigid social structures, also offered surprising fluidity in certain areas. Prostitutes often transitioned to other roles, demonstrating remarkable resilience and adaptability. For some, it was a temporary measure, a way to earn enough money to establish themselves elsewhere. One common pathway was marriage. Yes, you heard that right. While certainly not easy, and depending heavily on individual circumstances and locations, some women were able to leave brothels and marry, sometimes even successfully integrating into society. The stigma was undeniable, but life offered unexpected turns. Others might have married men who were already aware of their past, or perhaps they moved to a new town where their history was unknown. Another significant transition for some was moving into management roles within the very industry they had been a part of. After years of experience and perhaps saving some money, some former prostitutes became madams or brothel keepers themselves. This offered a degree of autonomy, economic independence, and a position of authority that would have been virtually impossible for women to achieve in almost any other profession at the time. They might have leased the property, managed other women, and navigated the complex web of local regulations and clientele. This highlights a crucial point. Even within these often marginalized spaces, women found ways to exert agency, to survive, and sometimes even to thrive on their own terms. It wasn't an easy life, and the systemic challenges were immense, but it wasn't always a passive existence either. These were individuals navigating a complex, often dangerous world, making choices to survive and, if possible, to better their circumstances. So, when we look back at medieval brothels, it's important to see beyond the simple judgments of sex and sign. It's about understanding the complex interplay of economic necessity, societal contradictions, and human resilience. It's about recognizing that history is rarely black and white, and that even in the most challenging of circumstances, individuals found ways to live, to adapt, and to shape their own destinies within the limited options available to them. It reveals a fascinating and often overlooked aspect of daily life in the medieval world, reminding us that people back then were just as complex and multifaceted as we are today. What did you find most surprising about this look into medieval brothels? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this dive into forgotten history, please hit that like button, share this video with a friend, and don't forget to subscribe for more fascinating explorations of the past. Your support helps this channel grow, and I truly appreciate every single one of you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.